Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault is apologizing after shifting statements about his family's Indigenous heritage.
I want to say unequivocally that I apologize for not being as clear about my family history as I could have been with everything that I know now.
CTV's chief political correspondent Vashi Kapellos has a reaction tonight. Vashi.
Heather, the minister is facing headwinds from multiple places over claims he's made about his heritage, now going back almost a decade. The National Post was first to report on those shifting claims. Boissonnault first identified as a non-status adopted Cree, then last week amended that to say his adoptive mother and brother were Métis citizens. The minister insists he was not trying to pretend to be Indigenous, but that his claims are reflective of confusion over his adoptive family's history. The issue, though, is really how all of this came to light. A medical supply company Boissonnault once co-owned bid for a federal contract, and here's the key, identified itself as Indigenous-owned. Boissonnault's involvement with that company was already being probed by a parliamentary ethics committee. The committee is probing whether Boissonnault's involvement in the business activities of the company after joining cabinet amount to a breach of conflict of interest rules. And the Conservatives, Heather, they're calling on Randy Boissonnault now to resign.
All right, Vashi, thanks.
Justin Trudeau twice found guilty of breaking ethics laws. Now we have Randy Boissonnault, whose company that he owned 50% of was bidding on and awarded contracts by Elections Canada. He falsely claimed Indigenous identity, disenfranchising, Indigenous folks who were rightfully eligible for the types of contracts that he was applying for. And and he says that he had said he never communicated with his former business partner while he was in cabinet, but that was later proven to be untrue, and he was in fact communicating with him from a cabinet retreat, literally at the cabinet table. And so this is well beneath the standard that Canadians should have for cabinet ministers. It's well beneath the standard for members of parliament. And the news today, of course, that his business shared an address with people who are alleged to be involved in cocaine trafficking, cocaine smuggling. So this is unbelievable that Justin Trudeau wants to keep this individual in his cabinet. Randy Boissonnault should resign, and if Justin Trudeau won't fire him, when we have a carbon tax election, Canadians will cast a judgment on this government.
They referred to a Randy. Well, he claimed that it was another Randy. We now know there is no other Randy. We know he falsely claimed he was Indigenous in order so that his company could steal resources that were meant for real Indigenous people. And now his company address matches the address of a place that was the location of 2 cocaine busts. Any one of these things would be a resigning offense. Why won't he resign now?
Mr. Speaker, I know the person referred to in today's article. I've never met that person. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. Those are the facts.
Apparently the person he doesn't know is himself. He says that he's not the Randy in the text messages, but his own business associates say there is no other Randy. He says that he said that he was Indigenous in order that he could get grants and contracts that were meant just for Indigenous people. Now he admits he's not Indigenous at all. And now, while his company has the same address as a place that has 2 cocaine busts, he says he doesn't know the person involved in that address either. Does this minister even know who he is?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the person referred to in the article today. I've never met her. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. The article states that fact, and that is the fact.
Randy Boissonnault must resign. If he does not resign, it is incumbent upon the Prime Minister to kick someone like that out. This is the Prime Minister that said the most important relationship he's ever had is with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Meanwhile, there are those in his cabinet, in his inner circle, that are abusing the Indigenous procurement system.
Mrs. Minister was asked repeatedly this morning whether she thinks the minister should resign. She didn't answer. Your thoughts on that?
Of course, she's going to say that he shouldn't resign. This is a member. This is a. It's clear that the government is very intent on trying to skirt this under the rug. They're trying tooth and nail to see this issue just go away because they don't want to have to deal with the reality that their government inaction, or at times their own party, has created a circumstance where they've tried to perceive or tried to mislead the public in the fact that they have a larger Indigenous caucus than they actually do. So the Liberal Party itself is also guilty of this. It's an institutional guilt. So she belongs to that party. So a party that can't itself even verify who is Indigenous within its own party, then the question is incumbent upon the minister. How seriously do they take reconciliation if they can't answer those questions, the basic questions of that kind of abuse? Because I said before, the real victims here aren't the Liberals. The real victim isn't Randy. The real victim is Indigenous businesses, Indigenous people that did everything right. They did everything right. These are people that I know that built a company for the first time. These are entrepreneurs. They signed all the paperwork. They did all that just to learn that the system is rigged right here at the top.
So for you, apology, it's not enough. I mean, why is an apology maybe not enough for you?
An apology is not enough because we've had too much of this. We've seen this time and time and time again in Canada. We've seen this issue, whether it was students trying to apply for access to scholarship money under the false name of being Indigenous, whether it's actors who are saying they are someone that they simply are not in order to get prestige, or whether that's a minister in Canada's cabinet that is saying that they are someone for the purposes of accessing a federal procurement strategy and to mislead that federal procurement strategy for the better outcome of their narrow financial request.
Pressure is mounting tonight for Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault to resign. He's facing a growing number of questions about his business activity and shifting statements about his family's Indigenous history. As Kate McKenna shows us, the opposition says none of it is adding up.
What's your response to Mr. Poilievre's call for your resignation?
Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault on the defense again.
I don't know the person in today's article. I've never had anything to do with them.
That article in the National Post says Boissonnault's former business shared a mailbox with someone detained in 2 major drug busts.
This is the behavior of a low-life fraud, not a federal cabinet minister. Simple question. How does that guy still have his job?
Mr. Speaker, despite the innuendo, here are the facts. I don't know the person in question. I never met that person in question. And Mr. Speaker, those are simply the facts.
Fresh calls for resignation for a minister already in the hot seat following revelations his former medical supplies company claimed to be Indigenous owned when bidding on a federal contract.
For him to say that in a company where he owns 50% of the business, that he didn't know that his business partner was making claims, false claims about the Indigenous identities of the business owners. This is not becoming of a parliamentarian.
I want to say unequivocally that I apologize.
Boissonnault apologized last week for contradicting statements about his family's Indigenous heritage.
I'm amazed that this Randy Boissonnault scandal just continues to unfold. It's like this slow-moving car wreck we're watching.
Do you think Some colleagues defended Boissonnault.
Randy's served capably as the Minister of Employment. He's my seatmate in the House of Commons, and I think he's an able guy, and I think he's going to continue to add value to Parliament.
Others said it's up to him to clarify.
I think Randy will explain, as he has already done that, he will explain his situation to whoever is interested in it.
Well, but what about you, though? That's not really an endorsement.
I think it's for Randy to continue explaining the circumstances. I'm sure he will keep doing it in the right way.
Boissonnault denies all allegations, saying his business partner worked alone when representing their company as Indigenous owned. But the Conservatives plan to keep pushing this issue. And with the Prime Minister set to shuffle his cabinet before the next election, some are watching whether Boissonnault will keep his spot. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
It's unbelievable that with the cocaine connections to the Liberal minister from Alberta, that those Liberals, that Prime Minister, want to allow him to continue to be in cabinet. He said that he was Indigenous to try and steal contracts from individuals who are Indigenous. That's okay as long as you are a Liberal. The company is involved in more than half a dozen lawsuits because of fraud, and that's okay as long as you're a Liberal. They came before committee and said things that we now know weren't true, like it must have been some other Randy. If he won't resign, why won't this Prime Minister fire that fraudster?
Members, at the very last possible moment, used a word which would not be considered acceptable
Can I just ask the honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Island and Rideau Lakes to please withdraw that last word?
Draw the last word. He should be fired.
I thank the honourable member.
Company once owned by Minister Boissonnault is under investigation by Edmonton Police on fraud allegations. There are questions about that company and his connection to that company. He recently had to apologize for appearing to claim indigeneity. Can you explain to Canadians then who've been reading all these reports why you still have confidence in Minister Boissonnault?
Minister Boissonnault has addressed these and will continue to answer directly for those. In the meantime, I'm happy that he is continuing to lead on issues around jobs and employment and represent Alberta in our government.
Later today, Minister Haidu is going to testify at a Commons Committee on Indigenous procurement programs. One of the issues that's being raised is some companies are falsely claiming indigeneity in order to access these procurement programs. That gets us to the whole issue of pretendians, people or companies trying to falsely claim Indigenous status. As someone committed to reconciliation, I wonder what you make of this phenomenon that companies seem to want to pretend to be Indigenous.
I think it's extremely important that part of reconciliation is empowering Indigenous communities and Indigenous people to participate fully economically, which is why we've increased and emphasized Indigenous procurement, but also investment in Indigenous equity in so many larger projects. The question of identity is an extremely delicate one for the federal government to weigh in on. It is much more important that Indigenous communities themselves make determinations around the framework and the rules they have, and we will continue to work with them on those.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci tout le monde. Bonne journée.